So this is Ovid's Metamorphoses. Ovid, or Publius Ovidius Naso, is a Roman poet writing during the reign of Augustus, so literally like 2,000 years ago. And his Metamorphoses is a collection of Greco-Roman myths and origin stories and kind of pseudo-histories written in 15 books, so it's quite long, in a chronological fashion, although it is myth, so chronology is kind of questionable, and Ovid himself is quite liberal with he takes creative license with the chronology, but it goes right from the creation of the world to the apotheosis of Julius Caesar. Like I said, split into 15 books. Each of those books has a certain number of stories, some more, some less, but each book itself seems to be about the same length, roughly, in this edition, 25 pages. And there's a flow to it. Each story leads into the next, Even the end of one book and the start of the next book, there is a connection between all these stories. There is a flow that goes right through the whole thing. Ovid kind of stretches to make that flow at times, but still. So this is Ovid's Metamorphoses. The word means change. It's a collection of stories all involving change in some way, usually people changing into things. So there are over 100 different individual myths and stories, and I'm going to try and go through all of them and just give a quick overview of what happens in each of them. So book 1 starts with the first story, creation, in which all is formless and void, and then the gods, or a god, it doesn't specify who, separates everything and gives everything shape and creates the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And Prometheus creates humans from clay. Next we have the ages of mankind. We start in a golden age, which then turns into a silver age with the fall of the Titans and the rise of the Olympian gods, then a bronze age, and then finally an iron age, where there's lots of sin, things are awful, humans are not acting very, very well. We have this guy Lycaon who feeds dead people to Jupiter in kind of a weird cannibalistic thing, which don't do that, so he turns him into a wolf. Hence our English word like lycanthropy comes from this guy Lycaon who turned into a wolf. The gods get together and they decide, hey, we're just going to destroy humanity and the earth. Things are not going well down there. We'll create a new race of humans to worship us after, because a bunch of the gods are like, well, wait, we're getting worship and incense and sacrifice from these humans. We can't just kill them. Jupiter's like, don't worry about it. We'll make new humans. These ones suck. So Jupiter, he's like going to nuke the whole world with his lightning bolts and let the world burn. But then he thinks about it and he decides instead to go for a flood. And so then we have a flood myth. The world gets destroyed in a flood. That's pretty much it. Next we have the story of Deucalion and Pyrrha. Deucalion, son of Prometheus, and his wife Pyrrha, they survived the flood, floating around on this raft. Since they're good people, Jupiter calls off the flood. They're the only people left on humanity, so they pray to Themis, the god of justice, or justice incarnate, and Themis tells them, throw your mother's bones over your shoulders. That will solve your problem. And they're like, what? Well, I gotta desecrate my mother's grave? And then they finally clue in and are like, oh, Mother Earth, the earth is mother to us all. And so they pick up some rocks, which they're like, rocks, of course, are the bones of the earth, throw them over their shoulders, and then the rocks turn into humans. Animals and other creatures start to spring up out of the mud just spontaneously, including some new ones that hadn't existed pre-flood. Also this giant python, like with a capital P, python, this huge snake called the python that Apollo has to go down and kill himself with like 1 billion arrows. Speaking of Apollo, our next story is Apollo and Daphne. So Apollo's making fun of Cupid. He's like, you and your petty bow, like, what? You can't do anything with your bow. My bow's the best. I'm the best archer. Cupid, you suck. So Cupid's like, this Apollo, I'm gonna get back at him. And gets 2 arrows, one that is like a love arrow and one that is a no love arrow. So he shoots Daphne with the arrow that makes her not love anyone. So she's our first like arrow ace queen. And then he shoots Apollo with the one that makes him fall madly in love with Daphne. So you can see where this is going. Apollo chases Daphne. Daphne doesn't want anything to do with it. This is running theme, by the way, gods chasing women. And Daphne calls to her father, the river god Peneus, and he turns her into a laurel tree. So she is safe from Apollo, but she's a tree. Also a running theme of these stories, people turning into trees and birds. We're going to see so many people turning into birds. We should like have a running bird count. Next we have the story of Io. So Io is the daughter of the river god Inachus. She gets singled out and raped by Jupiter. Rape is also going to be a huge theme of this, unfortunately, especially with Jupiter. Ugh. And Juno, the wife of Jupiter, you would think would be upset at her husband, and she is, but she's also more upset at the victim. Lots of victim blaming in this, by the way. So Juno catches Io and Jupiter, really mad at Io, and before she approaches, Jupiter turns Io into a cow. So then Juno shows up, and he's like, oh, I'm just here with this cow. You know me, I love cows, just hanging out with my cow pals. And Juno's like, oh, that's a great cow. You should totally give me that cow. And he's like, I don't know. She's like, come on, give me the cow. So he gives her the cow, which is this girl Io. Juno, who knows that this cow is not just a cow, puts this guy Argus, who has got like 1 billion eyes on his head. And he can see like all around him. And he always has at least one eye open. Puts him in charge of guarding this cow Io. So Jupiter gets a hold of Mercury and is like, hey, Mercury's his kid. Can you go kill Argus so I can get my cow wife back? Mercury rolls up to Argus playing his pan flute. Argus is like, hey, that's an interesting instrument. Where'd that come from? And Mercury's like, well, actually, this was invented by Pan. He had been chasing this girl Syrinx. Syrinx turned into a bunch of reeds. Pan took the reeds and created this flute. See, again, gods chasing mortals. Mercury puts Argus to sleep and then kills him. Juno is, of course, very mad about this. She takes Argus's head and uses all of his eyes to decorate her peacocks. So he doesn't really turn into peacocks, but all the sort of eyes on the tail of the peacock are from Argus. But she's super mad at Io, so Io's free, but Juno sets a fury on her. So he chases her all the way to Egypt. Jupiter, who kind of feels bad about this, he promises Juno he'll never be unfaithful to her again. And so Juno relents, and Io gets turned back into a girl. And because she had been raped by Jupiter, she gives birth to this child, Epaphos. Next story, Phaethon. So Epaphos has this friend, Phaethon, who's always bragging about his parentage. He's like, I'm descended from gods, I'm so famous, blah, blah, blah. And Epaphos calls him out. He's like, dude, would you shut up? Like, no one actually believes you. You have no proof. So then Phaethon goes crying to his mom, Clymene. She goes out and prays to the sun. Hey, sun god, can you come down and prove to your son that you're actually his father? He's kind of insecure about it. So then Phaethon gets sucked up to the heavens. Book 2, we're continuing the story of Phaethon. He goes up to heaven and his dad, the sun god, whom I guess we can call Sol or Helios or Phoebus or Apollo, maybe all of them, or maybe just some of them. People have lots of names. Says, hey kid, look, I'll give you anything you want to prove that I love you so much because you're my son. Phaethon's like, hey, can I ride that chariot that hauls the sun across the sky every day? And Sol is like, no, you can't do that. It would like totally kill you and cause great destruction. Pick something else. He's like, no, I totally want to ride your chariot. And he's like, crap, I promised. Why did I promise? God's making promises that they have to keep, causing great distress and destruction is also a theme of this. So of course Phaethon, he can't control daddy's car. He crashes and burns vast swathes of the earth. He causes so much destruction that the gods are all freaking out and Jupiter has to get involved. Jupiter snipes Phaethon with a lightning bolt, killing him and causing the chariot to crash, putting an end to the craziest joyride of all history. Phaethon's sisters are so sad about this, they weep for months and their tears turn into amber. There's also this dude Kynknos, who randomly gets turned into a swan. He's like related to Phaethon on his mom's side or something. I don't know if he's like an uncle. He gets really upset too and gets turned into a swan. Like I said, lots of turning into birds. Next we have the story of Callisto. Jupiter, up to his old tricks again, comes across one of Diana's warriors, her virgin warriors, Callisto. Jupiter disguises himself as Diana, manages to get close to Callisto, and then rapes her. He then leaves, and then Callisto has to spend the next 9 months in shame and guilt, even though she did nothing wrong, trying to hide this from the other virgins in Diana's court. Diana and all of her dudes are going to go bathe. They strip down, and they're like, come on, Callisto, what are you waiting for? And it's finally revealed, oh, she's super pregnant. Diana rejects her, calls her out for it, and kicks her out of the troop. And if that's not bad enough, she does give birth to a son named Arcas. But Juno, super mad that she slept with her husband, she was assaulted by her husband. Juno turns Callisto into a bear. When Arcas is about 16, he's hunting in the woods and he sees this bear and he's about to shoot the bear, doesn't realize the bear is his mom this whole time. But Jupiter's like, I gotta make good on this. And so he takes both the mom, Callisto, and her son up and turns them into stars. Juno gets really mad at this and goes down to the sea god Tethys and asks her, hey, can you make it so that these stars never touch your waters? There's lots of astronomy/astrology in here as well. So these are like stars that don't rotate this way. They kind of stay in the sky. Don't worry about it. They're stars now. Next, we have the story of the Raven and the Crow. So Raven spies this girl Coronis, who Phoebus supers into with another boy, and flies off to tell Phoebus. A crow catches up to the Raven and is like, hey, do not tell the god. Like, it's better off just let things be. And the Raven's like, no, I totally am going to tell Phoebus. He's gonna be so happy. The crow tells this story about Erichthonius, who was born, and then Athena, or Pallas, or Minerva. She's never referred to as Athena in this, I guess, because it's a Latin book, right? Minerva put him in a box and gave him to Cecrops's 3 daughters, but told them, hey, don't ever look inside this box. I don't know why the baby's in the box, but anyways. One of them does look inside the box, and then the crow rushes off and tattles on her to Minerva. By the way, the crow had been a woman who was, guess what, running from a god Neptune and called on Minerva for aid. Minerva's one of the virgin gods, like Diana, so if you're being chased by a god trying to take your virginity, those are the people you call on. Anyways, the crow has tattled to Minerva. Minerva's super mad and punishes the crow. Like, why? No, the crow didn't do anything wrong. Crow also mentions that this girl Nyctemene had sex with or was raped by her father and was turned into an owl, so that she's only out at night because she has so much shame because of what she did / what she was subject to. It's It's not a very feminist book, this. Anyways, the Raven's like, Crow, shut up. I gotta tell Phoebus that his girl's sleeping with some other boy. Phoebus, when he hears this, freaks out, gets his bow, and kills the girl. Kills Coronis as like punishment for cheating on him. He immediately regrets his decision though after he kills this girl, and then so he turns on the messenger, the Raven, and punishes the Raven. So ravens had been beautiful white birds up until this point, but Phoebus curses it, turns it into a blackbird. While Coronis is on her funeral pyre, she's pregnant by the way with Phoebus's baby. Phoebus rushes in, grabs the baby from the pyre, and gives it to Chiron, the centaur, to raise. Then we get a short one called Okirho, about this girl who prophesied way too much about her father, and because of that got turned into a horse. Next, the story of Mercury and Bados. Mercury steals Apollo's herd while he's sleeping, and the only one to witness it is this mortal, Bados. And Mercury goes up to Bados and he's like, do not tell that I stole this herd. Like, if anyone asks, don't tell them. Here, I'll give you a cow as payment. Promise not to tell anyone. And Bados was like, I swear I'm not going to tell anyone. Thanks so much for the cow. Like, these rocks are going to speak and give up where the herd is before I do. Mercury then goes away, disguises himself, comes back to Bados, says, hey, have you seen where my herd is gone? I'll give you a cow and a bull if you can help me out. I'm just missing my herd. And Bados immediately betrays and is like, oh yeah, the herd's up there. I'll take your cow and bull. Sweet, like double payday. And Mercury then reveals himself, says, ha, you immediately betrayed me, you sucker. I'm going to turn you into a stone. And then he turns him into a stone. Lots of people turning into stone in this one as well. Next, the story of Jupiter and Europa. So Jupiter gets Mercury. Mercury is like really problematic here, helping Jupiter out in all this. He gets Mercury to get the royal herd over to the sea, and so all these cattle get to the sea, and that's where this girl Europa likes to hang out. She's a princess of Tyre, by the way, so very fancy, very rich. Jupiter turns himself into a bull, a beautiful, beautiful bull, and like plays super passive and docile for Europa, to the point where she thinks he's sort of like a pet, and she's playing with him all the time. Eventually she jumps on his back to like ride around on him, and then he takes off into the sea and just like escapes with her. Now we're into book 3, continuing the story of Jupiter and Europa. Jupiter arrives in Crete and reveals himself to Europa that he's not actually a cow, or a bull I should say. Meanwhile, back in Tyre, Europa's father sends her brother Cadmus to go find him, and he says to Cadmus, if you do not find your sister, don't even bother coming back. You're exiled. Which is like kind of mean to Cadmus. What did he do? But anyway, so Cadmus goes off looking for Europa. With the story of Cadmus. He can't find Europa. She's on Crete, by the way. Since he's exiled, he asks the Oracle of Delphi, like, hey, I gotta make a new town. I gotta settle somewhere. Where should I settle? And they're like, hey, follow this cow out. When the cow lays down, that's where you're gonna settle. The cow settles down in Boeotia. Cadmus is like, great, this is where our new city's gonna be. He sends his dudes out looking for water. They come across this spring that's got this massive snake, dragon, serpent thing. It kills all of his dudes. Cadmus is laying around like, where are my dudes? Goes to find them, finds out they're all dead, killed by this giant serpent. Then we have this epic fight sequence with Cadmus fighting the serpent. Eventually he does kill it. Pallas shows up, Minerva, and tells Cadmus, hey, sow the teeth of this serpent in the ground. And he's like, sure, okay. So he takes all the dragon teeth, sows them in the ground, and they rise up out of the ground as soldiers. Cadmus is like kind of freaking out. He's getting ready to fight them. But they're like, no. Don't fight us, let us work it out amongst ourselves. And all of the new soldiers start killing each other until there's only 5 left. And then they are now Cadmus's dudes. And he founds the city of Thebes. It's important to note that this isn't Ovid coming up with these stories. These are stories that readers would have been well acquainted with. This is just Ovid writing them in verse, writing his sort of epic on Metamorphoses. It's all about change. Next, we have Diana and Actaeon. We've got Cadmus's grandson, Actaeon, who comes across Diana and her virgin warrior women out bathing. They all try to cover up Diana's nakedness, but too late. Actaeon has seen it, and so Diana splashes him with some water, turns him into a deer. He then goes off running, and all of his hounds that he had been hunting with, which there's like 30 different hounds listed, they just tear him to pieces and kill him, and thus Diana is avenged. Next we have Semele and the birth of Bacchus. So Juno, who this whole time is super mad at Europa's whole family line, which is ridiculous because Europa was assaulted by Jupiter, remember, stolen away. She was not consenting, had nothing to do with this, but because she got to experience sexually Jupiter, Juno's bad at her and her whole family, including Cadmus's family. So Juno wants revenge against Semele, who is Cadmus's daughter. Semele's mom, by the way, is Harmonia, the wife of Cadmus, who Harmonia is the daughter of Mars and Venus, which is super freaking cool. So Europa's niece Semele is also pregnant by Jupiter. So Jupiter's getting the aunt, getting the niece. He needs to be stopped. Juno goes to Semele in the guise of an old woman, which Juno takes this guise on quite a bit, and says to Semele, hey, did you really sleep with Jupiter? Because, like, how do you know? Next time you're with him, ask him to show himself in his full godly glory, and then you'll know for sure. And so the next time they're sleeping together, Semele's like, hey, can you do something for me? And he's like, I will do anything, I promise, I swear it, whatever you want, you got it. She's like, can you show me yourself in your like full holy glory? And he's like, oh crap, why did I promise that? Like, you don't want that. And she's like, yeah, I do. Come on, do it. So he does it, and it like kills her. She had been pregnant, so Jupiter takes the baby, Bacchus, puts it in his thigh for like the remaining term. And then when Bacchus is finally born out of Jupiter's thigh, he gives it to Ino, Semele's sister, and some nymphs to raise. Next, we have the story of Tiresias. Jupiter and Juno are arguing about who enjoys sex more. Is it the men or is it the women? Jupiter is, of course, like, oh, women, they get it's so much better in sex. And Juno's like, no, the men, they're all about it. They love it so much more. It must be so much better for the men. And then they're like, hey, you know who we can ask? We can ask Tiresias. So it turns out Tiresias, who had been born male, walking along in the woods, and he sees these two snakes mating, and he hits them with a stick, and that turns him into a her. And so now Tiresias is a woman. 7 years go by of womanhood, and Tiresias meets these two snakes again, mating in the woods, and she's like, if this happened once, I wonder if it'll happen again. Hits them with a stick and turns back into a man. So they go down to Tiresias, and they're like, hey, did you enjoy it more when you were a man or when you were a woman? And Tiresias had to be honest. He's like, actually, as a woman, it was much better. Which Jupiter's like, yes, I knew it. Juno gets super mad and blinds Tiresias. Jupiter's like, hey, what the heck? Why'd you do that? But one of these rules are you can't undo something a god has done. So Jupiter can't undo the blindness. So instead, he gifts Tiresias with the gift of prophecy and foresight. So Tiresias turns into this sort of famous prophet and oracle, who we see in Oedipus Rex, by the way. Tiresias shows up and prophesies some stuff about our dear friend Oedipus in the Sophocles play Oedipus Rex. Next, we have the story of Narcissus and Echo. We have this nymph Liriope. It's a hard name to say. She asks Tiresias as a prophet, like, hey, what's my son going to do? Is he going to have a good long life? And Tiresias says, yes, as long as he doesn't know himself. And you're like, what the heck does that mean? Well, it turns out her son, Narcissus, is this super beautiful guy. Everyone loves him. Everyone wants him. But he is totally like, I'm not interested in anyone. I want to be single. Just let me live my life. There's this one nymph who's super into him named Echo. Echo had been cursed by Juno for, guess what, sleeping with Jupiter. Her curse is that she's only allowed to repeat what other people say. She can't speak other than to repeat phrases that she hears. Hence the name Echo. You can see where this is going. So she's chasing down Narcissus, echoing what he says, and he's like, just leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with you. And she gets so sad that she shrivels away into nothing, and now all that exists is her repetitive voice. Thus, you're in sort of an area where there's an echo. It's because the voice of Echo is still there. So Narcissus, he's turned down so many people that one of them finally curses him, saying that, look, you've made all of us so upset by rejecting our love. I curse you that you will fall in love and never be able to get the person that you fall in love with. Then Narcissus bends down over a pool to get a drink one day and sees his reflection and falls madly in love. But no matter what he does, he can't get to his reflection. He cannot get that love. And so eventually he just withers away from longing, starvation, thirst, and turns into a flower. Turning into flowers, another major theme in this. Next, we have the story of Pentheus and Bacchus. Pentheus starts mocking Tiresias. He's like, the gods' prophecy, that's all nonsense. He's like an atheist redditor, I guess. And Tiresias prophesies that, hey, Pentheus, if you don't obey the gods, especially this new one, Bacchus, then you're going to be torn apart by your mother and sisters. Of course, Pentheus ignores him and rolls his eyes. And during this new festival, remember, Bacchus is just born, this new Bacchanalian festival, Pentheus has the ringleaders of this festival rounded up and arrested. He gets the main guy brought before him in chains. This guy, Apotheosis, then tells his story. He was just a poor fisherman working on this boat with a bunch of sort of really rough and tough guys, and they find this beautiful, beautiful boy. And they take the boy on board with sort of malicious intent, if you know what I mean. Except for Acoetes, he seems to be like a good guy. And the boy, who of course is Bacchus, says, hey, take me to this island, please. And so Acoetes tries to take him to the island. The other fishermen are like, no, stop, we'll take him to another island and then we'll have our way with him. So they take over the boat, turn it off course, and then we have this very vivid scene where Bacchus reveals himself and that the ship and the mast all start having ivy and vines crawling all over them and growing all over them. And then these wild cats of lynxes and tigers and panthers, sort of ghostly versions of them, start leaping out from underneath of Bacchus and send the fishermen into a frenzy. With fear, they just start jumping off the boat, and then they turn into fish. He turns all of them into fish, except for Acoetes. So from that day forth, Acoetes becomes a devoted follower of Bacchus, and that's why he's leading this Bacchanalian festival. Pentheus sort of rolls his eyes and orders Acoetes to be tortured to death. Pentheus is then like, fine, I'll get to the bottom of this myself. He goes off to this island where these Bacchanalian festivals are occurring, and he's walking around. It's quite dark, and during a Bacchanalian festival, people sort of go into an animalistic frenzy, right? And that's just what happens. His mother and his sisters and a whole bunch of other people are in this frenzy. They come across him, they imagine him to be an animal, and they literally tear him to pieces. His mother and his sisters tear him to pieces, just like Tiresias had prophesied. Now, book 4, we have the daughters of Minyas. They are a bunch of daughters who, they believe in the gods, but they don't believe in this new guy Bacchus. They're like, people just made this up. It's not real. There's a Bacchanalian festival going on, but the daughters, they're staying and they're doing all their work. They're weaving and whatnot. And they're like, hey, to kill the time, let's tell some stories. And the first daughter says, hey, I'm going to tell the story about how the mulberry became red. And so she tells the story of Paramus and Thisbe, which is, if you know some Shakespeare, you're going to recognize this one. It's very Romeo and Juliet, but also Paramus and Thisbe is also a play within A Midsummer Night's Dream. But the story is that Paramus and Thisbe, they love each other, but they're from two opposing families. Their fathers want them to have nothing to do with each other. They can communicate through this one wall, this hole in the wall, but that's it. They make a pact that, hey, we're going to go out at night and we'll finally meet. So Thisbe gets out first, and she sees a lion all bloody from the kill, and in fright she runs away and drops her shawl. The lion then tears up the shawl and then wanders away. Paramus turns up, sees Thisbe's shawl ripped and bloodied, sees all the lion tracks everywhere, and assumes, oh no, Thisbe has died. And so he takes his sword and he stabs himself beside a mulberry tree and falls over, blood spurting all over the white mulberries, turning them a deep crimson red. Thisbe then returns, looking for Paramus, finds him dying beneath this mulberry bush, takes the sword herself, and stabs and kills herself. And thus the two lovers are united in death. The next sister is like, wow, it's a great story. I'm going to tell you mine now, called The Sun in Love. So Helios, he catches Mars and Venus in bed together. Venus is married to Vulcan, by the way. So Helios goes and tells Vulcan, hey, your wife's cheating on you with Mars. Vulcan's super mad about this, but being a crafty guy, literally, he crafts this net, very, very fine net, and puts it over the bed. Next time Mars and Venus get together, he hoists the net, captures them, calls all the gods to come in and look at Mars and Venus trapped in this net together. And the gods think it's hilarious and what fun. Vulcan's kind of still mad about it. He's like, no, it's not funny. She's cheating on me. But Venus is super mad at Helios. So Venus wants to get back at Helios, and Helios just happens to be in love with this girl, Leucothoe. In fact, he was so much in love with her that when he's trying to travel across the sky during the day, he's really messing up, and he's going all over the place and then slowing down to get a good look at her and causing all kinds of havoc. Not as much as Phaethon, but still kind of bad. Helios then disguises himself as Leucothoe's mother, goes into her and sleeps with her, and her sister Clytie is really jealous and upset about this. Of course, she wants to be with the sun god. So she goes and tells her father, hey, my sister's sleeping with this guy. Her father's super mad and buries her alive, which is kind of a crazy reaction for a father to have. If you catch your daughter sleeping with someone, to bury her alive. Helios then uses his sunbeams to try and melt the earth where she's been buried to try and free her. He frees her, but she's dead by the time he manages to free her. He then weeps over her and anoints her body with holy nectar, and she turns into a frankincense tree, or bush, or shrub, or wherever frankincense is. Clytie, who managed to get her sister turned into frankincense, still's not sleeping with Helios, and weeps and gets super sad and turns into a flower. Now the next sister tells the story of Salmachus and Hermaphroditus. So we got Hermaphroditus, the son of Hermes and Aphrodite, hence the name, is being accosted by this nymph Salmachus. He keeps turning her down. He's like, I don't want anything to do with you, but Salmachus is like, she doesn't know the meaning of the word consent. She stalks him for a bit, and then when he goes swimming in this lake one day, she also strips down, jumps in the lake, and swims after him, and like wraps herself around him and will not let go, and prays to the gods that they'll be together forever and never be separated. And so the gods acquiesce. Again, no consent from poor Hermaphroditus, and Hermaphroditus and Salmachus then join and become one being with both aspects of female and male sex. So we have our first intersex character, although created non-consensually. Then we'll wrap up the story of the daughters of Minyas by having them transformed. Remember, these daughters have been ignoring Bacchus during his festival and telling these stories, doing the weaving, Much like on Apotheosis' boat, we have a whole bunch of vines and smoke and mist and phantom wildcats running through their house. And then the sisters get turned into bats. Next, we have the story of Athamos and Ino. So Ino, she's part of that whole Cadmus Europa family, but she hasn't been punished by Juno yet for just being related to a victim of Jupiter. Juno decides to get her by going down to the underworld, getting one of the Furies and saying, hey, Fury, kill this girl Ino. Tisiphone, one of the Furies, dresses up in like blood and gore, and this is like a very like graphic horror novel. It's pretty cool. It says she's accompanied by grief, terror, dread, and madness. Ascends to the overworld and attacks Ino and her husband, like snakes and poison and toxin and venom, and basically turns them mad. So her husband ends up killing their baby by dashing it against the rock. Ino herself then grabs her other son and jumps off of a cliff. Venus, who's Ino's grandmother, by the way, because remember, Venus and Mars had this kid Harmonia, who was married to Cadmus. Ino is the daughter of Cadmus and Harmonia. So Venus gets involved and says, hey, Neptune, Uncle Neptune, help these poor people out. They're just victims of this godly spat. And so Ino and her son get turned into sea gods. But all Ino's attendants and mistresses and maids, they're all super upset, and in their grief, they all get turned into birds or stone. Some of them get turned into stone, some of them turn into birds. I think I'd rather be a bird. Next, we have the transformation of Cadmus. So Cadmus is wandering around with his wife Harmonia, and he's like, why are all these things happening to me and my family? Is it because I killed that giant snake? Was that like a holy snake and the gods are punishing me for that snake? He's like, if that's it, just turn me into a snake already. And so he gets turned into a snake. And then his wife gets turned into a snake too. But they're like cool snakes who don't actually hurt people and aren't venomous. Next, we have the story of Perseus and Andromeda. Now Perseus, he's a character I can't stand Perseus. He's flying around. He's got Medusa's head that he's cut off, right? The Gorgon. He's flying around on these boots that are like Mercury's boots with wings on them. And Medusa's head's dropping blood everywhere, and wherever it drops, it turns into snakes. So there's like snakes everywhere. Thanks, Perseus. And he finds Andromeda chained to a rock in the middle of the ocean. It's something because her mother had like bragged about being the prettiest one ever, and so as punishment there was like a sea monster or something sent against them, and the only way to break the curse was to tie up their daughter or chain up their daughter Andromeda to a rock or something. Anyways, that's where she is. Perseus lands and he's like, haha, I am the hero, I will save the day. And he's like, I will fight and kill the sea monster as long as I get to marry you. And Andromeda's parents are like, yeah, sure, whatever, like if you can free our daughter, that's great. And so we have this epic battle with Perseus flying all over the place, stabbing and fighting against this sea monster. He eventually, of course, kills it and then gets to marry Andromeda. He makes some sacrifices, they have a big feast, and then Perseus tells his new father-in-law his stories about how he killed Medusa, how these two guardians only had one eye that they had to share between them, which gives me like, was it Hamlet vibes or Macbeth? Anyways, he steals the eye from them so they can't see him. He sneaks up through all these statues because the Gorgon Medusa, whatever it looks at with its snake hair, turns something into stone. But he shines his bronze shield up super shiny, and looking through that, he sees the reflection of Medusa sleeping and cuts her head off. He also tells that Medusa had snakes for hair because she used to have super beautiful hair, but then Neptune raped her on a shrine to Minerva, and Minerva, covering her eyes because Minerva's a virgin goddess, then punishes again the victim by turning her beautiful hair into snakes. But that's why Minerva has a Gorgon head, a Medusa head on her shield. Book 5. We have Perseus' fight in the palace of Cepheus. So Cepheus, that's Andromeda's father. During the wedding, Andromeda's ex-fiancé, Phineus, shows up. Phineus is like, hey, you were supposed to marry me. Why the heck are you marrying this guy? And Cepheus, Andromeda's father's like, you left, dude, when she got chained up to a rock. You didn't help. This guy Perseus showed up and actually helped and saved her. Phineus is still mad about that. And so this huge fight ensues. This like red wedding style, massive pages long battle. There's blood, there's gore, it is violent, it is graphic. In the end, there's like 100 or so people against Perseus, and he finally pulls out the Gorgon head and turns them all to stone. Phineus is like, okay, I yield. Look, you killed all my dudes. Just let me go. You've married Andromeda, whatever. And then Perseus is like, no. Grabs Phineus and shoves his head into the Gorgon's face and turns Phineus to stone. Like, Perseus, you didn't need to go that far. Perseus then, with his wife Andromeda, go to Argos and turn the king into stone. Just because, like I said, he just seems to be sort of a power-hungry, he's very like teenager vibes. Next we have Minerva meeting the Muses on Helicon. So Minerva's going to see this Pegasus, because when the Gorgon's head got cut down, its blood created a couple things. One of the things was this flying horse, this Pegasus. And apparently wherever the Pegasus walks, it's creating this magical spring. So Minerva's going to the Muses to see this spring that Pegasus is creating. Muses tell her the story about this guy Perennius, who had invited the muses in out of the rain, sort of gave them shelter, but then tried to assault them and lock them in the house. And then when they flew away, he like climbed onto the top of the roof and tried to go after them, but then fell off and like smashed his skull open. Seems like a bit of an idiot to me. So these magpies settle nearby. The muses are like, oh, get a load of these magpies. So it turns out they had been 9 sisters, and they thought they were so great they challenged the muses, challenged us, because there's 9 of them, to a contest. And they're like, we're going to win the contest, and we're the real muses, and you guys suck. They told their story, and it was like kind of mid. And then Calliope, one of the muses, told her story, and it's the one that won the contest. And they're like, hey, Minerva, you want to hear this story? Calliope, tell the story. It's so good. So Calliope then tells Minerva the story of the rape of Proserpina. So they start with this guy Typhon, who's this giant who's sort of buried underneath the island of Sicily, and he's like, oh, he's trying to move and get up, but the whole island of Sicily is crushing him down. But that's what causes all the earthquakes in Sicily. So there's all these earthquakes going along, so Pluto's down in the underworld, like, man, it's rough down here, I gotta get out and sort of breathe some fresh air. Venus is sitting nearby, and she's worried that, like, there's all these virgin goddesses, like Diana and Minerva, and now this daughter of Ceres, Proserpina, she's a virgin as well. And Venus is like, no, my whole thing is love. I can't keep having all these virgins. And you know, the underworld, like, I don't really have anything in the underworld. There's love in the heavens, there's love on the earth, but like in the underworld, there's no love. She's like, we gotta expand our territory, Cupid. Hey, Cupid, can you get Pluto to fall in love with Proserpina? That would be great. 2 birds with 1 stone. Or 2 gods with 1 arrow. Or 2 arrows. Anyways, Proserpina is just like being a little girl picking her flowers. She's super happy. And then Pluto shows up on his chariot and just grabs her and takes her to the underworld. And it's sad because as they're telling the story, they talk about how her sort of dress falls down and all the flowers that she had been collecting spill out on the floor. And she starts crying because she dropped all these flowers that she worked so hard to pick. Which tells you like how old she is. Like, this is a young girl. So yeah, Pluto takes her down into the underworld. There's this one nymph, Chiane, who sees this happen and is like, hey, Pluto, stop, don't do this, like, geez, consent, bro. But of course Pluto doesn't, and Chiane, in her sort of despair, sort of dissolves and turns into just a puddle of water inside of her pool, so she has no form anymore. Ceres, Proserpina's mother, is like going crazy all over the world. Where is my daughter? My daughter's been taken. What has happened to my daughter? She at one point stays in this mortal's house and gives her something to drink, and then the son, like a young child, like mocks Ceres and is like, you're pretty greedy, look at how much you're drinking, because like this is the first time she's had a break from searching for her daughter. Of course this little kid doesn't know that, but Ceres then throws her drink at the boy, turning him into a newt. Seems quite unnatural, and he does not get better. Ceres goes out looking again for her daughter and comes across Chiane's pool. Now Chiane wants to tell Ceres what happened, but she has no form, she can't. But she floats Proserpina's shawl out to Ceres, who sees it and recognizes it for what it is. In her despair, she then removes her blessing from Sicily. So Sicily's like one of the bread baskets of the Mediterranean. Ceres had been very strong there and had blessed the place to produce all kinds of wheat. And now she's removed that, so there's a famine. This other water nymph, Arethusa, is nearby and is like, hey, look, Ceres, stop with the famine. I know what happened to Proserpina. And tells her the whole thing. Ceres is even more distraught now that she knows the truth and goes up to Jupiter in Olympus and is like, hey, Jupiter, please, like, Proserpina is your daughter as well, by the way, because Ceres and Jupiter had this baby together. Please, can you free her from the underworld? At first, Jupiter's like, hey, don't be dissing Pluto. He's a great guy to have as a son-in-law. He's also his brother, by the way. So, like, Pluto's Proserpina's uncle, the gods, right? But he finally relents and he's like, okay, fine. If Proserpina hasn't eaten anything while she's been in hell, then she's allowed to leave the underworld. But it turns out that Proserpina has eaten 7 pomegranate seeds while she was down there. And it turns out this guy Ascalaphus caught her doing it and tattles to the gods. Proserpina splashes him with some water from one of the rivers in the hell, and Ascalaphus turns into a screech owl. Again, more birds. Oh, by the way, Proserpina's sort of companions and maids that had been picking flowers with her, they all get turned into sirens, which are these bird-like things that have girl faces, so they can fly around and search for her. Feels very harpy to me. I thought siren was more of a mermaid thing, but in this translation they're called sirens. So Jupiter says, well, she ate 7 pomegranate seeds. It's not much. Okay, we'll split the difference. She can spend 6 months in the underworld and then 6 months in the overworld. Hence our seasons, when Ceres is happy and bountiful for 6 months of the year, and then 6 months of winter when Proserpina is in the underworld. Ceres then goes back to the water nymph Arethusa, who told her what happened to Proserpina, and asks her like, hey Arethusa, what are you doing in Sicily? Aren't you a river nymph from another place? And Arethusa tells her the story of how she had been chased by Alpheus, this other river god. And of course, when a god's chasing a virgin, the virgin calls out to Diana or Minerva. In this case, Arethusa calls out to Diana. Diana splits open the earth and sucks Arethusa down into the underworld, and that's where she sees Proserpina, and then spits her back up in Sicily, so she's free from this Alpheus. Next, we have the story of Triptolemus. So Ceres yokes up her magical flying chariot to some winged serpents, dragons, things, and lends it to Triptolemus, this guy in Athens, and says, hey, can you like fly around the world and just airdrop seeds everywhere so you can spread my sort of bounty and the glories of agriculture and farming? And so he does that. He stops off at the king of Scythia's place, because Scythia's like kind of way out there and they don't even have agriculture. And Triptolemus tells the king all about it. He's like, it's gonna be great, you guys can have bread. And the king of Scythia is like, this will be great, but I kind of want credit for it, so I'm gonna kill Triptolemus and then take all the credit for this agriculture thing myself. The king, by the way, is named Lincus. When Lincus is about to kill Triptolemus, Ceres intervenes and turns Lincus into a lynx. So that's where lynxes come from. And then she tells Triptolemus, hey, get in the car and drive back to Athens, please. Now, step back a bit. So this whole story that I just told, this was the Muses, Calliope specifically, telling this to Minerva, right? Because remember the magpies? And this had been the story that the Muses had told during this contest. And of course the Muses won, but the other 9 sisters were super sore losers and were hurling abuses at the Muses. And so the Muses turned them into magpies, hence the magpies. Now, book 6 starts with the story of Arachne. So Minerva now is like, hey, Muses, you guys are great storytellers. I kind of want to tell a story too, so listen to my story about Arachne. So Arachne was this Lydian girl. She's super good at weaving, almost too good at weaving. She's very proud of herself. Everyone's like, wow, you must be blessed by Minerva, the goddess of craft. But she's like, no, it wasn't a goddess that helped me. I did this. This is an amazing thing. It's my work. I'm really proud of it. She's like, I wish Minerva would come down here and challenge me to a contest of weaving, and I would totally kick her butt because I'm better than her. And so Minerva shows up. It's like, okay, fine, let's go. You think you're so great. And they have a weave off. Minerva weaves this tapestry that shows all the gods in their glory, right? All of them in battle array and all their fancy armor and arms and outfits. Beautiful scene with all the gods. And then in the 4 corners, she shows 4 scenes of mortals who are either being too arrogant or are being punished by the gods for some reason. As sort of sticking it to Arachne, like, this is you, right? You're gonna lose. Arachne, in a move of brilliance, weaves a scene of all the times the gods have raped, assaulted, or been just horrible people to mortals. So we got lots of Jupiter, we got a few Neptunes in here, just scenes showing the gods are awful people. And it's actually really good. Like, Minerva can find no fault in this weaving whatsoever. So what does Minerva do? Really mature. She tears the thing to pieces, and then she grabs the shuttle and starts beating Arachne with it. And then Arachne tries to like hang herself by her threads, and Minerva's like, oh no, you don't, you're gonna live forever, and turns her into the spider. So that's where spiders come from. So Arachne really was right. She was better than Minerva. She proved it. And then Minerva, in spite, just acted horribly and sort of added another scene to Arachne's tapestry. Next, we have the story of Niobe. So we have a festival to Latona, who's this mother goddess. She gave birth to Phoebus and Phoebe, or Apollo and Diana. She's seen as like a mother goddess figure. And we got this character Niobe, who's like, what? She had twins? She has 2 kids? I've got 7 sons and 7 daughters. If anyone should be worshipped, it's me. I'm way happier than this Latona. Who even is she? Who cares? Look at me. And Latona is, of course, naturally upset at this. Like, hey, it's my festival. How dare you be so sacrilegious? And so she gets her kids together. Remember, Apollo and Diana are like super bow experts, and is like, hey, let's show this Niobe what's what. And so Apollo goes down and with his bow kills every single one of Niobe's 7 sons. And Niobe's husband kills himself as well. And Niobe's like weeping over their corpses, but she's like, I still got 7 daughters and they're married, so I got 7 sons-in-laws. Like, I have the last laugh. Latona does not win. I am triumphant. And then Diana shows up and kills her 7 daughters. So then Niobe weeping turns into a statue that's perpetually weeping. And then everyone worships Latona so much harder. Then the story of the Lycian peasants. So Minerva tells the story of how Latona was walking around with her 2 kids in like the guise of a mortal. She's super thirsty. She comes to this pool and she's like, hey, Lycian peasant dudes, can I drink from this pool, please? And they're like, no, you can't. She's like, please, look, my kids are so thirsty. I came and breastfeed them. Just give me a drink of water. and the peasants all jump in the pool and start kicking up mud so that she can't drink in it. So Latona has none of that and turns them all into frogs. And there's also a story about Marsyas, who was a satyr that was skinned alive by Apollo, and everyone was so sad about it that their tears turned into this river, I guess. And then again, Pelops, remember Pelops of the Peloponnese? He was cut into pieces and tried to be fed to the gods. Some of him did get eaten, but the gods were so upset that they put him back together, but they couldn't find that like piece between his shoulder and his neck, so they had to replace it with ivory. So this Pelops guy's got like a bit of ivory here. He's also like the father of the Peloponnese. That's where that name comes from. Maybe it wasn't ivory, maybe it was marble. Anyway. Then we have the story of Tereus, Procne, and Philomela. So Tereus of Thrace, he managed to break the siege on Athens, and so was given Procne, an Athenian, to marry. Years later, Procne's like, man, I miss my sister Philomela. Hey, Tereus, can you like go down to Athens and bring my sister to Thrace to hang out with me for a bit? So Tereus is like, yeah, sure, of course. Goes down to Athens. Caesar dad's like, hey, can I take your daughter Philomela back to hang out with my wife? She really misses her. I promise we'll keep her safe. And Tereus immediately falls in love with Philomela, falls in lust with her. He's lusting after her badly. So he takes Philomela and he locks her in a cabin in the middle of nowhere and just assaults her over and over and over again. She's of course protesting and screaming, so he cuts her tongue out and then continues to assault her over and over again. Tereus goes to his wife Procne and is like, oh, I'm so sorry, your sister's died. I tried to get her here, but it was an accident. Something happened. I'm so terribly sorry. He's still got her in this cabin. He's abusing her whenever he can. So Philomela can't speak, but she can weave. So she weaves a message into a cloth and manages to get it smuggled to her sister Procne. Procne reads it, is shocked her sister's alive, but just totally enraged at what her husband Tereus has done. And so during a bacchanalian feast, when all the women are going crazy in a frenzy, Procne manages to lead them to this cabin. They break in, free Philomela, and take her back to the palace. Philomela is really scared to be in the palace where Tereus is, but Procne reveals herself and says, no, hey sister, I'm here. We got to get a plan to get back at my husband Tereus. They're like, what can we do? And then the son of Tereus and Procne walk in, and they kind of look at the kid and they're like, we could kill the kid. And Procne's like, oh, I don't want to kill my son, but it would really get back at my husband. But oh, I shouldn't kill my son. They agree to go ahead and kill the son. It's quite Medea in Euripides. So they take the son off, kill him, and Philomela chops him into pieces and creates a meal out of him. Then Procne goes to her husband Tereus and says, hey Tereus, it's a special day, you have to eat by yourself, by the way, and brings him this feast alone. So he's eating this meal of his own son, and he's like, hey, where's my kid? You should bring him in and he can enjoy some of this. And Procne's like, he's already here with us. And Tereus is like, what are you talking about? And then Philomela busts in, covered in blood and gore, and like the butcher's knife from cutting the son up, and was like, ha, we killed. Well, actually, she doesn't say anything because she's got no tongue. But Procne reveals that, ha, we've killed your son, and now you've eaten him. And Tereus freaks out, chases them around with his sword, trying to kill them, and they all turn into, you guessed it, birds. Tereus a hawk, Procne a swallow, who can like mourn her son, and Philomela into a nightingale, because apparently female nightingales don't have a song, they don't sing, because she had her tongue ripped out. Next, the story of Boreas and Orithyia. Boreas is from Thrace. He's constantly trying to woo Orithyia, who he's in love with, but she's Athenian, and they remember the story of Tereus. So they're like, Athenians and Thracians don't want anything to do with each other. So then Boreas, who's like wind god, he's like, why am I trying to woo her when I can just take her by force? And so he gushes in with his wind and takes her by force. They have two sons who become Argonauts and go with Jason to get the Golden Fleece. This takes us to book 7, starting with the story of Jason and Medea. So Jason heads off to Colchis, which is way, way far away, trying to get the Golden Fleece. And we have Medea, who is the daughter of the king of Colchis, and just falls super in love with Jason. And she has a lot of internal arguments back and forth, like, my heart loves Jason, but my mind knows that this is really bad, and it would be betraying my kingdom. And so she finally agrees with herself, like, hey, we're not going to go for Jason. We're going to stick with our home and our family. And then Jason comes up to her and says, like, hey, can you help me out with these challenges and these trials I have to face? And of course, she falls right back in love with him and agrees to. So Medea is like super magical woman. Gives him a potion so that he is immune to the fires of these brazen bulls, which he then yokes and plows this field with. He then sows the field with dragon teeth, very Cadmus, which then, of course, grow into soldiers that try to attack him. He throws a rock in between them, which causes them to all fight amongst themselves and kill themselves. And so Jason is victorious. victorious. She also gives him a potion to put the great serpent/dragon asleep that guards the Golden Fleece, and so then Jason gets the Golden Fleece. And victorious heads back to Greece with Medea as his wife. Then the story of Medea and Aeson. So Jason's like, hey Medea, you're so powerful and magical and everything. Can you make my father Aeson young again? He's like super old now, and I think he'd love that. So then we have this cool scene with Medea flying all over, because she's got this magical chariot pulled by winged serpents that can fly, because her grandfather's Helios, god of the sun. Anyway, she flies all over, getting all sorts of magical ingredients and plants and whatnot, and creates this potion that can restore youth. And as she's stirring it, the stick she's stirring it with bursts into bloom and creates a bunch of olives. Wherever she spills some drops, they like blooms spring up like it's springtime. She gets Aeson, puts him into a deep sleep, sends everyone else away, and slits his throat and fills his veins with this potion, and he becomes like 40 years younger. Next, the story of Medea and Peleus and her flight. So Jason and Medea are at this other court, Peleus's court, and Peleus's daughters are like, hey, what you do with Aeson? Can you do our father? Can you make him young again? She's like, yeah, sure, fine. Hey, bring me a super old ram and I'll prove to you that I can do this. And so they throw the ram into her magical pot with all the potion and stuff in it, and it turns into a baby lamb. And so Medea's like, hey, get your father. We're gonna chop him up, throw him into the pot as well, and he'll turn super young. But she just puts like water and like grass and stuff in the pot. It's not a real potion. And so they just kill her father. And so Peleus's kids just sort of kill him for no reason. And then Medea has to flee. She flees to Corinth, where the play Medea by Euripides takes place, in which she poisons Jason's new wife, kills their kids, and then flies off to Athens under the protection of her new husband, Aegeus. We then have the story of Theseus. So we don't get the full backstory, but I think Aegeus, he's trying to like conceive, and so he manages to get someone pregnant, and he buries his sword under a rock and tells the pregnant woman, hey, when you have a kid, get my sword under the rock and then I'll know that it's him. And then he goes back to Athens and marries Medea. Anyways, he's about to poison Theseus because Medea has given him this poison to kill Theseus. Can't remember why, but at the last second, he sees the sword, recognizes it as his, and recognizes Theseus as his son. So he knocks the poison out of his hands and is reunited with his son, Theseus. Or united, I guess. Not reunited. It's the first time they met. The poison, by the way, was made from flintworts, which are a plant/moss that's created from the slobber of Cerberus, three-headed dog that guards the gates to the underworld. Anyways, Medea just like teleports out. She's done. And Athens throws this big party for Theseus and goes over all of his achievements. We then have the story of Minos, Aiakos, the Plaga Aegina, and the Myrmidons, which is kind of a mouthful. So Minos, king of Crete, he's threatening Athens and the king of Athens, Aegeus, with war because he wants revenge for his son, Androgeus, who had been killed by the Athenians. So Minos is going around Greece getting all kinds of allies. So then Minos goes to Aegina, where Aiakos is the king, is like, hey, Aiakos, want to help us take out the Athenians? And he's like, no, sorry, I'm super tight with the Athenians. We like got a bond. I can't fight the Athenians. And Minos is like, all right, screw you guys. Then an Athenian ship shows up in Aegina with this guy Cephalus on board, who is Athenian. And Cephalus is like, hey, Aiakos, can you help us out? Like, Minos is coming to war. And he's like, yeah, of course, bro, I got your back. Like, you're Athenians. You don't even have to ask. And then Cephalus is like looking around and he's like, there's a lot of like young men the same age here, and there's a lot of people missing. Like, what the heck happened? I haven't been here in a while. Fill me in. So Aiakos then talks about this plague that had just ravaged Aegina. And why is there a plague there? Well, it's because Juno is jealous because they named the place Aegina after this girl who was Aiakos' mother, by the way, who slept with Jupiter. So everyone's dying from this plague, and then Aiakos, he finally calls out to Jupiter, and he's like, please stop this plague. It's killed so many of our dudes. We're so depopulated. And he sees these ants crawling up an oak tree, and he's like, just give us back as many people as there are ants here. And so then the ants turn into people. These like young, fresh dudes who are going to make a great army. And Aiakos calls them his Myrmidons, from the Greek word for ant, which is like myrmid something. So the ant people, the Myrmidons. We then have the story of Cephalus and Procris. So this guy asks Cephalus, like, hey, you got the super cool javelin. Where'd that come from? It's like gold, and I don't even know what kind of wood that's made out of. What's the deal with that? And so Cephalus is like, oh boy, here we go. All right, so it's a story about me and my wife Procris. So Cephalus is out hunting when the goddess Dawn comes to him and tries to come on to him. And he's like, no, I've got this beautiful wife Procris. Please don't. I'm super cool with Procris. Don't want anything to do with your godliness. But then he starts thinking, man, my wife's super hot. Like, if someone's coming on to me, there's probably lots of people coming on to her. Like, how do I know she's faithful to me? What if she's cheating on me? Cephalus is not a great guy, by the way. So Dawn, this goddess that had came on to him, gives him the power to disguise himself. And so he disguises himself as some other dude and goes to his wife, Procris, and tries to get her to cheat cheat on him with him, the disguised him. And he keeps pressing her and keeps pressing her and offering her lots of money. And finally she gives in and says, yes, fine, I'll sleep with you. And then he, of course, turns back into his normal self and he's like, ha, I gotcha. You were going to cheat on me with me, disguised as someone else, but you didn't know that. So you're a horrible cheater. How dare you? She's like, why'd you have to put her through that? And then Proclus flees and runs off into the wilderness and lives with Diana and her virgin warriors. And then Cephalus, he's like all proud of himself that he managed to chase his wife away that he loved so much because she had not been faithful to him when he... Ugh. So he goes back and finally asks Proclus, his wife, for forgiveness, and she agrees to come back. She also gives him this dog Whirlwind that had been a hound granted to her as a gift from Diana, and this magical javelin that never misses its mark, and once it's thrown, it will fly back to the wielder boomerang style. So Cephalus is out hunting again, and whenever he's out hunting, he gets super hot and sweaty, and he just sits down, and the cool breeze, the zephyr winds, manages to cool him. And every time he's like, oh, zephyr, yes, just oh, I love this breeze. Makes me feel so good. And someone overhears him talking with this zephyr and is like, he's cheating on his wife with this zephyr character, and tells Proclus. And Proclus is like, oh no, my husband's cheating on me with this zephyr character. And so she goes out in the woods and is spying on him while he's hunting. And again, he lays down and he's like, oh, zephyr, cool winds, cool me down. And Proclus makes some noise in a bush, and Cephalus, being the wonderful hunter that he is, hears noises and immediately fires at it. Throws his never-missing javelin, killing his wife. Bro, what the heck? Book 8, we start with the story of Scylla and Minos. So Cephalus and the Myrmidons, they would go to Athens to fight this war against Minos and the Cretians. Cretians? People from Crete. Meanwhile, Minos is sieging one of Athens' allies, Alcathous. The princess of this city, Scylla, falls madly in love with Minos. And she's like, I can't betray my city to Minos, but what if I did? And is there some way I can get with Minos? She finally reasons with herself that, well, Minos is trying to avenge his son, so justice is on his side. He's going to win regardless. So really, if I betray my city to him and open the gates for him, it's just going to cause him to win so much sooner and save so much bloodshed and slaughter. So really, I'm not betraying my city. We're going to lose anyways. I'm just helping him out, and maybe he'll super love me. And her father, who is the king, he's been managing to protect the city by a magical means of this purple tress he has. He's got this purple highlight in his hair that's so magical, it's keeping the city safe. So Scylla goes in, cuts the tress off, and takes it out to Minos in the enemy camp. And Minos is like, ugh, what? How dare you? I'm not gonna sully myself with some betrayer of her homeland. You're a horrible person. All right, boys, pack it up, let's go. And so they break the siege and just leave. So I guess she sort of won for her own homeland. Anyway, she gets so mad that she swims out and grabs onto the ship and is like, take me with you. And then her dad turns into a hawk and then flies out and rips her off the ship. But then she turns into a bird too. And that's it, I guess. They're both birds now. Next, we have the short sort of story of the Minotaur. So when Minos gets back to Crete, he finds his wife is pregnant with someone, but not by him, I think, and gives birth to this half man, half bull thing, the Minotaur. And so Minos gets this brilliant engineer, Daedalus, to create this labyrinth, and he imprisons the Minotaur in this labyrinth. The Minotaur feeds on sacrificed Athenians, because remember, they're at war with Athens. But Theseus, the sort of prince of Athens, he volunteers as tribute, goes into the labyrinth, and manages to kill the Minotaur, and importantly finds his way back out using the threads tied to him by Ariadne, daughter of Minos. So another daughter betraying her father. Theseus then runs away with Ariadne, but then abandons her, and so Bacchus turns her into a star. Lots of people turning into stars. Then we have the story of Daedalus and Icarus. So Daedalus, this brilliant engineer, is imprisoned by Minos. He's on this sort of cliffside prison, and so he manages to fashion wings out of feathers. And his son Icarus is a bit of a dolt, and he's fooling around with the feathers, and Daedalus gives him a set of wings and says, hey, don't fly too low, or the waters will dampen your wings, and it will make you too heavy, and you'll crash into the ocean. Don't fly too high, or the sun will melt the wax, and you'll also crash into the earth. And so, of course, what happens? They escape, and Icarus, being a dumb teenager, flies too high, his wings melt, and he crashes into the ocean. Then we get a short story of Perdix, which has Daedalus burying Icarus, and nearby is a partridge. And it's revealed that the partridge, Perdix, had been this, I think, nephew of Daedalus, who was also super crafty, and he invented the saw, he invented the compass, the drawing circle compass. And Daedalus was so jealous that he threw him off of a wall, and so Minerva, the goddess of craft, turned him into a partridge. Next, we have the story of Meleager and the Caledonian boar. So all the gods are getting worshipped and venerated and sacrificed to, except for Diana. She's kind of upset about this, so she releases this boar onto the world, this horrible boar that's just destroying things all over the place in Caledonia. And we got a ton of heroes show up to fight this boar. We got Jason, Theseus, this guy Meleager is kind of like in charge. Also this girl from Arcadia who's like super good with the bow, very Katniss coded. And we have this huge hunt scene of all these dudes chasing down this boar. None of them are able to damage it until the girl from Arcadia, her bow manages to cut it enough that it bleeds so that they can track it. And Meleager, with his very Tolkien-esque name, jumps on the back of it and manages to stab and kill the boar. He's super smitten with this girl, and so when he splits the trophies up, he gives a lot of them to this girl. But then a bunch of the other men are like, why would you give it to the girl? She didn't actually do anything. And they try to take the trophies from the girl. Meleager gets super mad and kills them. Then we have the story of Althea and Meleager. So some of the people that Meleager had killed were his uncles, which when his mother, Althea, finds out, really puts her in a dilemma. So she's got her son who has killed her brothers, and she wants to avenge her brothers, right? But that involves killing her own son, so she doesn't know what to do. Like, should she be a good sister or a good mother? Now, Meleager, when he had been born, the fates had said that this log in the fire, once it burns out, your child will die. And so Althea had, of course, taken the log out of the fire and kept it safe for this whole time. But now she has it, and she's like, if I burn this, I can avenge my brothers. She finally makes up her mind that, yes, I'm gonna have to kill my son to avenge my brothers. So she burns the log, and then Meleager cut to him burning alive, or at least dying in intense pain as if he is burning alive. Althea then kills herself for killing her son, even though she did it purposefully. Meleager's sisters are super sad about this whole thing, but Diana, who's like sated that the guy who killed her boar has been killed, turns his sisters into birds. Next is Achelous and the nymphs. So Theseus, he's on his way back to Athens. He's invited into the home of this river god Achelous to wait out there's like been a flood. The river's raging. He needs to just hang out till the river calms down. Achelous tells the story of these nymphs who didn't invite him to a party, and so he killed them all in a massive flood, and they turned into islands. There was one of these islands that was this nymph that Achelous really loved. So he was sleeping with her, and when her father found out that she was sleeping with someone, her father killed her and threw her into the sea. And Achelous was like, hey, Neptune, can you turn her into an island so that my river can embrace her forever? So he does. One of the dudes that's with Theseus is like, Achelous, that is so stupid. The gods can't turn people into things. Like, that's ridiculous. One of Theseus's other dudes is like, no, chill out. Listen, the gods actually do this. So have you heard the story of Philemon and Baucis? So they were these old couple. They were the only ones that would let Jupiter and Mercury in. Jupiter and Mercury had gone to 1,000 different houses. No one would let them in. And this old couple, Philemon and Baucis, they're super poor, but they're like, yeah, come on in, strangers, and we'll feed you. And so they feed them what they can, and then the gods reveal themselves, and we're like, we're gods, and you were actually nice to us, thanks. What do you want of us? Ask anything of us and you'll have it. And they, in sort of one of the only beautiful stories in this whole collection, say that we want to die at the same moment. I don't want to have to bury my wife, and I don't want her to have to bury me. Let us die together. And so the gods agree, and they also say, hey, we're also going to turn you guys into our priests, and your shack is going to turn into a beautiful temple, and we're also going to flood and destroy the rest of the area that would not let us in. We'll turn that into a swamp. And so that happens, and then when Baucis and Philemon actually die, they turn into trees together at the same time, and are twin trees living together for all eternity. The river god Achelous then says, yeah, gods can totally change people into things. Let me tell you the story of Eresthicthon and his daughters. So there was this terrible guy, Eresthicthon, if I'm saying that right. If I say it really fast, then you can't tell, who didn't believe in the gods at all, and he's cutting down this sacred grove. And one of his workers is like, hey, there's this sacred tree. I'm not cutting down this sacred tree to Ceres. Like, this is an old ancient oak. I'm not doing it. And Eresthicthon is like, give me that axe, kills the laborer who refused him, and starts chopping this tree down himself. The tree starts spurting blood out as he's chopping it, and a voice prophesies his doom from within the tree, but he's like, I don't care, I'm chopping this thing down, and tears this tree down. Ceres, who this tree and the nymph inside of it were sacred to her, sends one of her messengers out to the goddess Hunger. Now, Ceres and Hunger can never meet, of course, because Ceres is the god of plenty and grain and agriculture, and so sort of the antithesis of Hunger. But she sends a messenger out to Hunger and says, hey, Hunger, I want you to curse Eresthicthon. And so Eresthicthon is then cursed with an insatiable appetite. He eats and eats and eats and eats, but he's never ever satiated. He eventually sells his daughter into slavery to buy more food because he spent so much money on food. And his daughter, who had had her virginity stolen by Neptune, calls it to Neptune for aid. And Neptune gives her the ability to shapeshift, which she uses to escape her captors and get back to her father. Her father then uses this to his advantage to keep selling her over and over again and get more and more food. But he eventually succumbs and starts consuming himself, and that's how his story ends. Hercules. And so the river god Achelous is like, see, the gods really do change things. And actually, I myself can change shape because I'm a river god. So then book 9 starts with the story of Achelous and Hercules. Achelous tells Theseus and his band about this time that Achelous and Hercules fought over the hand of Deianira. They have this epic wrestling competition where Achelous, he turns into a snake and then he turns into a bull, but Hercules manages to overpower him and actually tears one of his horns off. And then a bunch of river nymphs fill that horn with food and fruit and flowers, and it turns it into a cornucopia, or a horn of plenty. That's where the horn of plenty came from. He then follows up with the story of Nessus and Deianira. After he marries Deianira, Hercules has taken her all around Greece. And at a river crossing, Nessus, this centaur, says, hey, I'll carry your wife across. Hercules, you swim across. Hercules swims across, turns around, and Nessus is like, haha, I'm going to steal your wife now. And Hercules is like, no, you're not. Pulls out his bow, using one of his arrows that's poisoned with the blood of the Hydra that he had killed, and shoots and kills Nessus. And so Nessus, as he's bleeding and dying out, he takes his shirt off, covered in blood and gore, and gives it to Deianira and says, hey, this will keep Hercules faithful. It's actually like magical love blood shirt, which you're like, okay, sure, how is this going to play out? Then we have the death and apotheosis of Hercules, which kind of spoils it in the title itself. But years later, Deianira hears rumors that Hercules is cheating on her. Remembering Nessus and the shirt, she then sends the bloody gore-soaked shirt that's soaked in Nessus's blood. Remember, Nessus had been shot with an arrow soaked in the blood of the venomous Hydra, and so through transitive properties, this shirt is now poisonous or venomous. Hercules puts on the shirt, I don't know why, it's like covered in blood, and it sticks to him very much Jason's new wife in Medea by Euripides. It melts his skin. He tries to tear it off and it tears his skin off, and Hercules is dying in immense pain. And he's on his funeral pyre, and all the gods are like weeping, like, Hercules was so great, like, wow, why can't we make him a god? And Jupiter's like, okay, fine. Fire will burn away his mortal parts, but his godly parts will remain, and thus the apotheosis of Hercules. He steps off his pyre, now a god, super powerful and beautiful and great. Then we get the story of the birth of Hercules. Alcmene, the mother of Hercules, is telling Iole, who is this pregnant girl, the story of her birth of Hercules. And so, of course, because Alcmene had slept with Jupiter and been impregnated by Jupiter, Juno is really upset. So Juno is outside the room where Alcmene has gone into labor, and Juno has her fingers crossed like this, which is preventing Hercules from being born. But one of Alcmene's maids, who's the super smart girl, goes out and sees Juno there and says, oh, hey, you won't believe it, she finally gave birth. And Juno jumps up and separates her hands like, what? She shouldn't have been born yet. And when she separates her hands, then boom, Hercules can be born. So I guess that's why if you've got a terribly long labor, it's because there's some mother goddess who's jealous out there with her fingers crossed. And Juno gets the last laugh by turning the maid into a weasel. Next, the story of Dryope. So Iole, the woman that Alcmene had been telling the story to, tells her the story of Dryope, her sister, who picked a lotus flower, which immediately started bleeding because this lotus was actually a nymph that had been turned into a flower. And this causes Dryope herself to immediately start turning into a tree. Very, very slowly, though, from the bottom up. She gives her child, her baby, to Iole and promises that her baby will be raised to respect nature and respect the gods and respect that the gods could be anywhere and not just to pick random flowers willy-nilly. And she turns into a tree. Then we have the story of Iolaus and the sons of Caliro. So at Hercules' funeral, Iolaus is miraculously turned back into a youth by Hebe, the goddess of youth. This causes a whole bunch of the gods to start complaining. Like, hey, we've all got our favorite mortals. How come we can't all give them their youth back? And Jupiter's like, no. Look, everything goes according to fate. It was just fate that Hebe could turn this one person back young. Even I've got a whole bunch of dudes that I think are super cool, and they're super old now. Like Minos, he was great, and now he's an old man. I'd love for him to be turned back, but that's just fate. We can't all do that. And there's also these sons of Caliro that they're like children, but they get to age up to adulthood super fast so that they can revenge someone or something. Anyway, next the story of Byblis, who's like, Byblis, very Lannister style, falls hopelessly in love with her twin, Paunos. She really struggles with her feelings of love for her brother, like love for her brother, but eventually writes him a love letter and gives it to him. And of course, he's horrified with this and like, I don't want anything to do with this. And she's like, oh no, why did they tell him a letter? Like maybe it was a bad time. Maybe she sort of doubles down and is like, no, I'm still gonna get this guy. But he runs off. She goes chasing him and eventually just overcome with exhaustion cries herself into oblivion and melts into a spring. Next we have the story of Iphis and Ianthe. So this guy Ligdus tells his wife Telethusa that, hey, you're pregnant, when you have a kid it's got to be a son. We cannot afford to have a daughter because if you have a daughter you have to pay dowry for her to get married. They're like, we're so poor we can't afford a daughter, so if it's a girl you're gonna have to kill it. And then the goddess Isis, we get an Egyptian goddess, and like a whole bunch of other Egyptian gods and goddesses show up in a dream to Telethusa and tell tell her like, hey, it's going to be a girl, but raise it as a boy and everything's going to work out. So she has a baby and they decide to name it Iphis, which is a gender neutral name. And she's like, great, it's a gender neutral name. And she just plays it off as if it's a boy and just raises it as a boy. And so Iphis then gets engaged to Ianthe. And Iphis is so in love with Ianthe. And Ianthe is so in love with Iphis. But Iphis is really struggling with like sort of very LGBTQ plus issues. Like, well, I was raised as a boy, but they still see themselves as a girl. And they're like, well, a girl can't marry another girl. Yes, they can. So like, what am I gonna do? Ianthe's gonna hate me when she finds out that I'm not really a man. I wish I was a man so badly. So then Iphis becomes a trans icon because Telethusa, his mother, says, hey Isis, remember when you told me in a dream to raise him as a boy? Well, I did. Can you make him a boy? And so, boom, Iphis becomes a man, marries Ianthe, and they live happily ever after. Our first trans character. So we're now into book 10, story of Orpheus and Eurydice. So Orpheus and Eurydice get married, and they are like super, super in love, right? But then Eurydice gets bit by a snake and dies. Yikes. So Orpheus, who's like the ultimate bard, right? He travels to the underworld and plays his lute and sings a song for Pluto and Proserpina and convinces them to return Eurydice on one condition, that as their way back out of the underworld, he doesn't turn around and looks at her. So it's like very Lot style. And so they're working their way back up out of the underworld, and of course he's worried he hasn't heard from her. Is she still behind him? Has she fallen behind? He turns around and she immediately just gets sucked back down into the underworld forever. Orpheus then swears off women. He will never be with another woman. He only has love for Eurydice, which we think is great, but then he turns to young boys instead and has this thing for like the budding youth of young boys, and like talks about how he sort of started that whole thing in Greece, like pederasty. Not cool, Orpheus. Then we have the story of Cyparissus, who was a boy who loved this tame stag. There was this stag that would walk around and was this beautiful, beautiful animal, and it was so tame that people could go up and almost touch it, but this boy Cyparissus, he could literally ride this thing. It was like his pet. But then one day he's out hunting and he accidentally kills it with a javelin. Again, hunters, like, don't just shoot at random noises in the woods. Make sure you know what you're shooting at. And he begs for Apollo to let him mourn forever because of what he's done. And so Apollo turns him to a cypress tree, which is a symbol for mourning and death, apparently. Next, the story of Ganymede, or Ganymede. Jupiter falls in love with this boy Ganymede and takes him up to Olympus to be his cupbearer. And of course Juno's like, I'm not cool with this, because of course Juno's not. But also like, of course Juno's not. Then we have another story of Hyacinth, who's this boy that Apollo's super in love with, throwing the old discus around. Apollo gives it a good throw, and Hyacinth, like a puppy dog, goes chasing after it, and it bounces off the ground and smashes into Hyacinth's face and just like destroys him. And so Apollo mourns and turns him into a flower. Then we get the story of Pygmalion, which is like, oh, it's a great story. He is the ultimate, I don't want to say incel, because that's got really negative connotations, but he's created his own anime waifu in this story, and it's beautiful. So Pygmalion has nothing to do with real women. He's like, real women, ugh, you are not up to my standards. And so he carves out of marble the perfect woman, according to him. And he's dressing his his statue up. He's decorating it. He's laying on the couch with it. He's pretending it's like his real wife. Pygmalion would fit right in with the internet age. So then there's this festival to Venus, and Pygmalion prays to Venus, and he's like, please, can I marry a woman just like my statue? And so next time Pygmalion goes back to his statue and starts feeling it up, he starts feeling it's pretty soft, actually. There's some give to this, and Venus has turned his statue into a woman. And a woman with no agency, because apparently she just instantly loves Pygmalion. Or maybe she does fully consensually, and Pygmalion's a great partner, who knows? They have a daughter named Paphos. Next is the story of Mira. So Paphos has a son, Kinyras. Kinyras has a daughter named Mira. So this is like, Mira is quite Biblis coded. She falls madly in love with her father, Kinyras. And she doesn't know what to do with herself, and eventually she tries to hang herself because she loves her father so much in like a not great way. And her maid bursts in, sees her hanging herself, saves her, and is like, what is going on? Learns that Mira is so in love with her father. And so the maid at first is horrified, but then is like, okay, I'll help this girl out. So then there's this festival where the men are not allowed to sleep with their wives. They have to remain sort of celibate from their wives, or their wives are not allowed to sleep with men. Anyways, the father, Kinyras, is for a time not sleeping with anyone. And so the maid goes in and says, hey, there's this girl who's super into you. Do you want me to bring her in? And Kinyras is like, yeah, of course, duh. And so in the dark, he sleeps with his daughter. And this happens again and again and again. And eventually he's like, man, I gotta figure out who this girl is. So he brings a lantern in one night, and it's revealed that it's his daughter, Mira. And so he's, of course, upset. He tries to kill her. She flees. She's pregnant, by the way, by this time with her father, and prays to the gods, who then turn her into a myrrh tree. Hence her name, Mira. Myrrha? whatever. She's still pregnant, by the way. She's got this big bulge in her barky trunk, and from that is born Adonis. So then next we have the story of Venus and Adonis. So Cupid is kissing up his mom, Venus. He accidentally pokes her boob with one of his arrows, and she falls madly in love with Adonis. So she's like laying around, hanging out with Adonis, and she warns him, hey, you should be really careful when you're hunting dangerous animals. In fact, don't even do it. Let me tell you the story of Atlanta. So the next story of Atlanta. Everyone loves this girl, Atlanta, but she challenged all of her suitors to a foot race because she's like a fantastic runner. And she's like, if you win the foot race, you win my hand in marriage and we'll get married. If you lose the foot race, you die. Just kind of a bit intense, Atlanta, but fair enough. I guess you don't want to be running foot races every day. So that sort of narrows the pool down. So one guy, Hippomenes, totally falls in love with her and he's like, fine, we'll do it, we'll race. Atlanta, for the first time, is looking at this Hippomenes and is like, kind of like, you know, maybe I want to lose. Like, this Hippomenes, he's kind of a nice guy. And Venus helps Hippomenes out. She gives him these golden apples. So they set off and they have their race. And Atlanta sort of is taking the lead, but then she sort of like hangs back a bit, lets them catch up. Then she's like taking the lead and she's like, maybe should I just let this guy win? And she's like, you know what, I gotta be fair. And she just blazes on ahead of him. Then Hippomenes pulls out these golden apples that Venus has gave him and he starts throwing them like off course. So then Atlanta sees this golden apple flying through the air and then goes off course and chases it. So then Hippomenes can catch up. And he keeps doing this and keeps doing this. And then the last apple he throws so far away, Atlanta runs off to get it, grabs it. Venus makes it super heavy, so she's really weighed down. And so Hippomenes manages to win the race. So he gets to marry Atlanta. Everyone lives happily ever after, right? No, because Hippomenes forgot to give sacrifice and praise to Venus for allowing him to win this race. And so she turns both of them into lions. I don't know why Atlanta got punished for this. Actually, I think there's a thing with them like desecrating a shrine. I feel like they were like having sex in front of it or something. I don't know. So Venus, done telling the story to Adonis, then flies away on her silver swan-led chariot. And Adonis is like, yeah, whatever, Venus, I'm going to go hunt some dangerous game, and gets killed by a wild animal. I think a boar stabs him or something in the groin. So Venus mourns Adonis and turns him into a flower. Book 11 starts with the death of Orpheus. A whole bunch of women that are so mad that Orpheus is turning them all down because he's sleeping with little boys tear him to pieces. And his head and his lyre float down the river and end up on the Isle of Lesbos, which is a famous island for poets and poetry. But fortunately, Orpheus manages to go down to the underworld and is reunited with Eurydice, and they live happily ever after. Or they die happily ever after. They're undead happily ever after. They're in the underworld together forever, but they're happy. One of the few happy endings to these stories. Next, the story of Midas. So Bacchus punishes all these women who have killed Orpheus by turning them all into trees. And then Bacchus, he's missing this old satyr Silenus, who had been sort of a guy who raised him. And Midas, King Midas, managed to find Silenus and brings him back to Bacchus. Bacchus is super happy. He's like, man, Midas, what do you want? I'll give you anything. And Midas is like, make whatever I touch turn to gold. And Bacchus is like, geez, that's really a bad thing to wish for, but okay, sure. So then, of course, Midas, everything he touches turns to gold, which he's like, well, this is great, until he tries to eat, and he turns everything into gold, so he can't eat. Then he prays to Bacchus, and he's like, I'm so sorry, I made a really stupid wish. Can you please take the power away? And Bacchus tells him to go wash in the river Pactylos, which he does, and it washes the gift away. And that's why this river is full of gold. And he lives happily ever after. Oh no, wait. Apollo and Pan are having a musical competition. Apollo justifiably wins, but then Midas is like, I think Pan did better. Why did Apollo win? Apollo sucks. And so then Apollo's like, screw you, Midas. I'm giving you donkey ears. So then Midas grows donkey ears. Midas tries to hide them in a turban, but of course his hair cutter is always seeing his ears. But his hair cutter doesn't want to tell anyone because like he can't rat out the king, but also he's like, I gotta tell someone. So he digs a hole and whispers into the hole, hey, Midas has donkey ears, and then buries it back over. A bunch of reeds grow in that place, and then every time the wind blows through the reeds, they're all saying, Midas has donkey ears. So everyone finds out about it. Honestly, donkey ears is probably the lightest punishment you can get from the gods at this point. Now we move on to the first founding and destruction of Troy, which is basically just Neptune is helping build the wall of Troy, but then he doesn't get paid for it, so then he gets mad and floods the whole place. Then we get the story of Peleus and Thetis. Proteus, this old god of the sea, tells Thetis that she's going to bear a son that will be stronger and it will surpass its father. And Jupiter's like kind of into Thetis, but he does not want that to happen because like he overthrew his father. He doesn't want to have a son that's going to overthrow him. So he tells his son Peleus, hey Peleus, you should get that Thetis. So Peleus comes up to Thetis, who's like nude bathing or nude sunbathing, and assaults her, and she starts shape-shifting to try and get away from him and turns eventually into a tiger. It scares Peleus and he runs away. Peleus goes to Proteus, and Proteus is like, hey, I'll tell you what, you need to tie her up. And then when she keeps shape-shifting, eventually eventually she'll just turn back to a human form and give up. Then you can sort of have her. And that's what he does. He ties her up. She fights it and eventually has to give in, and Peleus assaults her. And Thetis then gives birth to Achilles. Next we have the story of Daedalian. So Peleus is exiled for accidentally killing his half-brother Phocus, and he seeks refuge with his king Ceyx. And Ceyx tells Peleus the story of Ceyx's brother Daedalian. So Daedalian had this daughter, Chione, who was raped by both Mercury and Apollo in the same night, and then gave birth to twins, one side by each, which that's not how biology works, but maybe. So Chione thought herself better than even Diana, because she had twins. Diana's the virgin goddess, I don't get it. Anyways, Diana just shoots her with a bow and kills her. Daedalian, who's then grieving his dead daughter, throws himself off a cliff and gets turned into a hawk. Next, we have the cattle of Peleus. So because remember, Peleus had killed his half-brother by accident or something, so his half-brother's mother, this goddess, has sent this giant wolf around the countryside to just destroy everything. So Peleus prays that the goddess will relent, but she won't. But then his wife, Thetis, I guess it's his wife, the whole thing about wife, not consensual wife, Thetis then intercedes and prays, and the wolf turns into stone. Then we have the story of Ceyx and Alcyone. So King Ceyx, after Peleus left, has to go to an oracle for some reason. And the regular way to the oracle is like full of bandits, so he has to go by sea. And his wife Alcyone is like, please don't go, please don't go. And he's like, I have to go. I don't know why he has to go, but he thinks he has to go. And of course, once he gets out to sea, there's this huge maelstrom, this like vividly described scene of a tempest which kills and drowns Ceyx. Juno, who's kind of taking pity on Alcyone, sends her messenger Iris to travel on her rainbow to the god of sleep and tells the god, hey, send a dream to Alcyone telling her that her husband has drowned. And so Alcyone decides Morpheus, this sleep-related being that can change form, like morph means form, sends Morpheus to Alcyone in the form of her dead husband and says like, ooh, I'm the ghost of your husband, he's totally dead. And she, in grief, rushes out to the sea and is super sad and sees some like corpse floating in and thinks, oh, I wonder if that's part of my husband's ship. Turns out it is her husband's corpse, and she rushes out along the mole and jumps and turns into a bird and goes and like attacks his corpse like with kisses, and then the corpse turns into a bird, and then they're both birds, but one's not a corpse anymore. Anyways, birds. And that's where we get the word halcyon from, because while these birds, I think they turn into kingfishers, while these birds are roosting, the seas are calm for a certain number of days. And so Alcyone, Halcyon. Anyways, next we have the story of Icicus, who was Priam's son, falls in love with this nymph Hesperia. Guess where this is going? Hesperia is trying to run away from Icicus. She gets bit by a snake and she dies. Overcome with grief and guilt, Icicus throws himself off a cliff into the sea trying to die. He gets turned into this seabird that's constantly diving into the ocean trying to die. Book 12. Whew. We have the expedition against Troy. So we've gone through sort of the mythological creation of the world in ancient Greece, and now we're into the sort of the Iliad. So the Greeks set out for Troy, but get stuck around due to bad weather. And so they have to sacrifice the virgin daughter of Agamemnon, Iphigenia. When they're going to sacrifice her to Diana, Diana sort of rushes in, takes her away, replaces her with a deer so that Iphigenia doesn't actually die. And then they're free to go on to Troy. And then the god Rumor, who can sort of hear everything and lives in this massive house that can see everything that's going on, informs the Trojans that, hey, the Greeks are coming. Next, we have the story of Achilles and Kinkos. Kinkos, who's the son of Neptune, is invulnerable to all weapons. Achilles is having this epic fight with him. He's stabbing and slashing and cutting him, and it's doing nothing. And Kinkos is just laughing. So then Achilles comes by on a pass with his chariot, jumps off, tackles him, and throttles him to death with the sort of chin strap of his helmet. And is like, hey, you're impervious to weapons, so I'm still going to kill you. Very Achilles. Oh, and of course, Neptune turns him into a swan. Then later, after the battle, we have old Nestor, one of the old Greek warriors who's at Troy. He tells Achilles and the lads, he's like, I'll tell you the story of someone else who is impervious to all weapons. Then we get the story of Caenis, or Caeneos. So our second trans icon, born Caenis, which is the female version of the name, born as a woman, but raped by Neptune. And Neptune says, as sort of compensation for this stealing of your virginity, what do you want? What can I get you? I'll give you anything. And Caenis says, I want to be turned into a man so this never happens to me again. Just like probably the darkest story in this whole selection, in my opinion. And so Caenis becomes Caeneos and turns into a man. And now he's living his life as a man. I mean, he is a man. He's a man. Neptune also gives him the bonus that he is totally impervious to all weapon attacks. So then Nestor continues the story by telling us the story of the battle of the Lapiths and centaurs. So we're at this wedding and there's a whole bunch of centaurs there and also humans and the human bride. And one of the centaurs is overcome by lust for this human bride and tries to like attack and assault and steal her right at the wedding, which causes Red Wedding 2.0 or 3.0 if you consider the other one, that Perseus Andromeda one, the second one. Anyways, huge battle that goes on for pages and is so bloody and so gory. And in the end, Kainios, our trans icon, he can't be injured by any weapons. One of the centaurs starts like dead naming him and calling him like, "You're just a woman. I know what happened to you. You'll always be a woman to me." And starts throwing trees at him. And then they literally strip an entire hillside of a forest and whip all these trees at Kainios, which completely covers him and sort of suffocates him. And that's how they manage to kill Kainios, although he sort of turns into a tiny brown bird and flies away. Next is the story of Nestor and Hercules. So Tlepolemus, who's at this siege with Troy, he's like, "Hey, Nestor, how come you're not mentioning Hercules in your stories? Hercules is my dad. Like, I'd love to hear some great stories about Hercules." And Nestor's like, "Hercules killed, like, basically all my brothers. Like, I get that he's a super strong dude, but I'm not going to talk about him. We got beef. Like, he devastated my family. I'm not going to tell stories about him." Like, okay, Nestor, that's dark. And then we have the death of Achilles. So Neptune, he's super mad that this city he and Apollo had built, or he built the walls for it, is being destroyed. So he's like, "Hey, Apollo, can we, like, do something about that?" Apollo's like, "I got you, man." Goes to Paris and is like, "Hey, Paris, why are you firing arrows at random dudes? Like, aim for Achilles." And so Apollo guides his arrow and Paris manages to kill Achilles. And that sets Ajax and Ulysses off into a fight over who's going to inherit Achilles' arms, by which I mean like his armor and his weapons, not his actual limbs. Although it'd be kind of cool to have like the right hand of Achilles mounted on your wall. Book 13 starts with Ajax and Ulysses and the arms of Achilles. So they both give their arguments as to why they think they should be the ones to get Achilles' arms. Ajax is like, it's all about bravery and prowess in battle and brawn. And Ulysses is like, no, brains over brawn. It's all about strategy and generalship, and I'm actually the one who should get it. And so the Greeks agree that Ulysses should get the armor, and so they give it to Ulysses. Ajax gets so mad that he's like, "No one will kill Ajax but Ajax," and he kills himself, which is like a total overreaction. Next is the fall of Troy. Very short. Ulysses goes back to Greece, gets like some of Hercules' arrows, and also brings Hercules with him, and then Troy is destroyed. No mention of the horse in this one, I don't think, unless I missed it. Next, the story of Hecuba, Polyxena, and Polydorus. So on the way back to Greece, the ghost of Achilles shows up on one of the ships and is like, "Hey, you should totally need to sacrifice Polyxena to me." Polyxena is the daughter of Hecuba and Priam, by the way. And Polyxena totally accepts death super bravely and is like, "Yeah, do it, come on, whatever." Hecuba is overcome with grief, rushes out onto the beach, and sees washed up there the body of her son, Polydorus. Now, Polydorus had been sent away to Thrace to be raised there, like outside of the war and in safety. The king of Thrace had been given lots of money to look after him. And of course, once Troy fell, king of Thrace slits the boy's neck and keeps all the gold for himself. And so Hecuba, she's like just super distraught, lost all her kids, lost her city. She makes a plan. She goes to the king of Thrace and says like, "Hey, I've got more gold for you, like for my son." And so being super greedy, the king of Thrace lets her in, and then she gouges his eyeballs out and gets turned into a dog. Next, the story of Memnon. So Aurora, this goddess, is mourning her son Memnon, who was killed by Achilles in battle. And then Jupiter does something for a memorial, and so during his pyre, the black ashes turn into these black birds. It's supposed to be black because Memnon was like the king of the Ethiopians. He's like one of the black characters in the Trojan War. And then Aurora's endless tears become morning dew. And now that we've gone through the Iliad, we're getting into the much more Roman and Latin mythology. So we have next the pilgrimage of Aeneas. So Aeneas, he escapes Troy with his son and his father. They stop at the island of Delos, where the king Aeneas there tells them about his daughters who anything they touch turns into food. And so Agamemnon had captured them and used them to sort of create food for his journey from Greece to Troy. They called the gods to help them and were turned into doves. Aeneas and his boys then sail to the sea where Scylla and Galatea were, and we get Galatea telling Scylla the tale of the Cyclops, and we get a bunch of the Odyssey and the story of Ulysses. We get the story of Achis and Galatea. Galatea is in love with this guy Achis, but the Cyclops is totally in love with her and is like writing this beautiful poetry and expounding upon her virtues, but then he gets super mad and just takes a giant boulder and squishes Achis with it, and then blood flowing out from under the rock turns into a river, but not like a blood river, it's just a normal river. And the rock splits in half, and then Achis is reborn as a river god. Then we get the story of Scylla and Glaucus. Glaucus is chasing Scylla. She's super scared and running away because he's this like blue dude with like green hair and he's got a fish tail for legs. He's like a merman. He finally catches up to her and he's like, no, I used to be just a normal fisherman, but then this one catch that I had, they all flopped around in their nets and went back into the sea. I thought that was kind of weird, so then I was chewing on this plant and then I suddenly jumped into the ocean. Next thing I knew, I turned into this sea god. Scylla is like, cool story, bro, still not interested, bye, and leaves. And then Glaucus, really mad, goes to the island of Kirke, or
Circe? Circe? Book 14 finishes the story of Scylla and Glaucus, with Glaucus asking Circe, hey, you're super magical, can you help me get this Scylla girl? And Circe's like, no, like, find someone else to fall in love with. If she's not into you, bro, like, move on. He's like, no, I could not love anyone besides Scylla. I must have her. And then Circe's like, okay, fine, watch this. And she turns Scylla from the waist down into a pack of wolves. So she's like a pack of wolves, but then like with kind of like a hydra of wolves, or like a Cerberus, but with like a woman's torso and head limbs coming up out of it, I assume. And then of course Glaucus is like, oh, actually I don't really like Scylla anymore now that she's like half dog. She's like, Glaucus, you're a piece of trash. We continue on with this pilgrimage of Aeneas. He goes to see the Sibyl. He's like, please, can I go to the underworld and see my father? His father has died by this time. So she takes him down into the underworld, and he like sees his father and does some stuff. On the way back up from the underworld, Aeneas is like, hey, I'm going to build you a temple, and we're going to have sacrifices to the Sibyl. Thanks so much for this. And she's like, no, I'm not a goddess. I was actually just a normal woman, and then Apollo wanted my virginity, and I was like, having none of that. And so he gave me the ability to live this super, super long life, but with no youth. So I'm just going to shrivel up and die and disappear one day. And Aeneas is like, oh, that sucks, man. And then they find this Greek guy, Metamorphoses, who had been part of Ulysses' Odyssey, his adventure, right? And tells them a whole bunch of stories of that, including the one of Circe. He's like, see that island over there, Circe? Do not go over there, man. So then we get the story of the island of Circe, where he says, hey, we went to the island, a whole bunch of us went off, we found this woman, Circe. She had a whole bunch of like wild beasts. We thought they were going to attack us, but they were super tame. And then with her like potions and lotions, she turned us all into pigs. And we would have stayed as pigs forever, but one of us escaped, went back to Ulysses, who came and fought with Circe, and then they came to an arrangement where Circe gets to sleep with Ulysses, and in return his men get turned back into men. So that happens. And while Metamorphoses is on this island, he comes across this statue of this man, or this boy, this youth with a woodpecker on its head, and he's like, hey, what's the story of that? So then we get the story of Picus and Cannons. So Picus was a handsome king from Latium. He had this wife Cannons that he super loved, but Circe saw him and was like, I want that Picus. And he was like, no, I've got Cannons. I don't want anything to do with you. And so Circe, super mad, turns him into a woodpecker. Cannons, looking out for her husband, just eventually fades away because of grief, turns into nothing. Then we have the triumph and apotheosis of Aeneas. Aeneas becomes the king of Latium. He fights a war against Thornos and the Rutuli. The Greeks are too busy turning into birds and trees and stuff at this point to help anyone, so they get no help from them. They try to burn the ships as well, but because the ships are made out of wood that was sacred to Juno from the forest, Juno stops them and turns all the ships into sea nymphs. And the sea nymphs, like, because they had been Trojan boats, help everyone out at sea, but they don't help any Greek ships out. Anyways, Aeneas wins this war. Venus convinces Jupiter to make Aeneas a god, because Venus is Aeneas' mom, right? And so a river washes away Aeneas' mortal parts, and he becomes divine. He becomes known to this god Indiges. Like, the word indigenous, I think, comes from Indiges. Indiges was like one of the local gods that the early Romans referred to the locals as worshipping. Anyways, in this, Ovid's equating Indiges with Aeneas. Next, we have further kings of this Latin kingdom: Ascanius, son of Aeneas, Silvius, Latinus, Alba, Epitus, Capitus, Capes, Tibernius, who drowned in the river that he gave the name Tiber to, Acrota, Aventine, who of course ruled on the Aventine Hill, and that's where that gets its name from, and then Procca. And during the reign of Procca, we get the story of Pomona and Vertumnus. Pomona, again, another arrow ace queen, doesn't need any man, doesn't want anything to do with anyone, just living her best life in her garden. Vertumnus, super in love with her, turns himself into an old lady so he can go chat with her, and says like, hey, you should totally stop being ace and should totally marry someone. As a warning, he tells her the story of Iphis and Anaxarete, in which Iphis was totally in love with Anaxarete, who wanted nothing to do with him, and so he hanged himself outside of her door, which is like horrible. And then at his funeral, Anaxarete is looking out the window at this funeral, and her cold heart eventually spreads throughout the rest of her body, and she gets turned into a statue. And so Vertumnus is like, Pomona, you should definitely marry me, or else you'll turn into stone from being such an uptight virgin, I guess. I don't know. But Pomona's like, nah, thanks, I'm just gonna live alone. I'm cool, I'm okay with it. And then Vertumnus, he gets rid of his disguise as an old woman, turns back into his beautiful, handsome young self, and Pomona's like, you know what, I'm in. Okay, fine, let's get married. Which, sure, whatever. And then we have the legends of early Rome. We get the apotheosis of Romulus. Romulus is is now the king. After the wars with the Sabines, there's a truce where him and Tatius of the Sabines, they co-rule. Tatius dies, so Romulus is the sole ruler again. Mars, who's Romulus's dad, is like, hey, we should get this guy up in the heavens. So Romulus ascends as the god Quirinus, and then Romulus's wife Hersilia also gets taken up and becomes a star. All right, last book, book 15. Starts with Numa and the foundation of Cortona. So after Romulus, Numa is elected king, and he starts traveling all over Italy, trying to get more wisdom and knowledge and stuff, and he ends up founding the city Cortona. Then we have this big section, the doctrines of Pythagoras. So Numa comes across Pythagoras, who then gives him all sorts of wisdom and tells him about how everything is always in flux, everything is always changing. This very much felt like sort of the capstone of the whole Metamorphoses, which is all about change, right? And Pythagoras tells about how nothing is constant, everything is always changing, and it gives all kinds of examples of history and nature and everything, how nothing is constant. And even talks about how the sort of transmigration of the soul, and when a body dies, the soul carries on, and though the soul is immortal, it takes on different form again and again, and is always changing. And then there's a whole section about sort of vegetarianism and how you should never eat meat or never eat any sort of living breathing thing, because those could contain the souls that could have been human, which felt kind of like there are other religions that I got vibes from, and I was like, are they influencing Greek philosophy at this time? And he even says like sacrificing to the gods is bad, like don't kill a cow to sacrifice it to Ceres, like just use it to plow your fields, like live and let live. So that was really cool, and I felt like that, okay, we're wrapping it up now, we've come back to this sort of the main thing about change, but there's still a few other stories after this that kind of feel sort of tacked on. So we get the death of Numa. So after ruling wisely for many years, Numa dies. His wife, the nymph Egeria, is super upset about this and is just like crying her eyes out all the time. This guy Hippolytus tells her like, would you stop crying? Like, we get it, you're sad, but everyone's sad. Everyone's got their own things to be sad about, like, which doesn't feel great for Hippolytus. Then he tells her his story, the story of Hippolytus, where he was falsely accused by his stepmom of trying to sleep with her because his stepmom wanted to sleep with him, but he wouldn't sleep with her. So she told her husband, hey, your son's trying to sleep with me. So then Theseus banished him. By the way, he's Theseus' son. Theseus banishes him and calls out Neptune to punish him. So then Hippolytus has this like horrible chariot accident, like car crash, where he's like very mangled and cut up and dies basically. Then the god of healing, Asclepios, restores him to life, and Diana hides him in Italy. So yeah, he's like, think you got stuff to cry about? Well, look at my life. We then get the story of Kippos, this Roman general who, returning home after this battle, starts growing horns out of his forehead and gets this prophecy that, hey, if you enter Rome, you will become a king. And he's like, no, I don't want to be king of Rome. Like, I don't want power for myself. I do what I do for the Roman people, not for myself. And so he calls all the Romans together outside the city and he says like, guys, I've heard news that there's someone who has horns. By the way, he's covered up his horns with a laurel wreath. He's like, someone who has horns is going to enter the city and be a tyrant and rule horribly and take away all your freedoms and whatnot. And promise me that you'll never let this person with horns enter the city. And they're like, of course, never. We promise you. And then he takes off the laurel wreath and reveals it's him, he's the one with the horns, and everyone's shocked, and they're like, once they sort of learn what he's all about, they sort of grant him honors for looking after the city ahead of his own personal interests, and that's why the gates of Rome have these horns on them. It's in honor of him. We then get a short story about Asclepios. So there's this horrible plague going on in Rome, and the Romans go and seek out the god Asclepios, the god of healing, and the god turns into a snake and agrees to join them, goes on their boat, and then goes off on an island by the Tiber, and that's why there's a temple to Asclepios there. And then our last story, the apotheosis of Julius Caesar. So Venus, remember the mother of Aeneas, ancestor of Julius and the Julius clan, sees that the death of Julius Caesar is coming and wants to stop it, but all the other gods and Jupiter are like, no, it's fate, it's gonna happen. So just as he's murdered, Venus swoops in and takes his soul up to heaven and creates a star out of him, which is the comet that was seen just after his death. And then Jupiter proclaims that Caesar's son, Augustus, will surpass even his father, just like Jupiter surpassed Saturn, etc., etc. And this is just, I guess, Ovid trying to suck up to Augustus, writing this part in. And then the epilogue is kind of hilarious. I'm actually going to read it. The epilogue. Now stands my task accomplished. Such a work as not the wrath of Jove, nor fire, nor sword, nor the devouring ages can destroy. Let, when it will, that day that has no claim but to my mortal body end the span of my uncertain years. Yet I'll be born the finer part of me, above the stars, immortal, and my name shall never die. Wherever through the lands beneath her sway the might of Rome extends, my words shall be upon the lips of men. If truth at all is established by poetic prophecy, my fame shall live to all eternity. So Ovid's just going on that, like, even though I may die, my poetry will live forever and make me immortal. And yeah, sure, Ovid, I'm sure people will be reading your story for like 2,000 years after you're dead.